2012 through 2014 Ford F-150 XLT front brake pads and rotor replacement. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I'm going to walk you through the steps of replacing those. Okay, to get started, you need to get your vehicle up in the air, the front of the vehicle in the air, and remove the front tires. If you're doing this at home, use floor jacks and jack stands. Now that I got my wheels off, I'm going to work on the driver's side first. So I'm going to turn my wheel to the right just slightly. That gives me a little more access to work on the caliper here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the 13mm bolt here and here on the caliper. I wanted to share with you guys one of my favorite tools in my toolbox. It's my ratcheting wrenches made by Mountain. They're about 3 feet long, and they are on this particular wrench is 13-15 combination wrench, and they're, like I said, they're a ratcheting wrench with a switch here, and they're great for doing brakes and stuff like that. They're extremely long, so you can get a torque on them and break the bolts free real easy. They come in a set from 8mm all the way up to 19mm. I'll leave a link in the description for these if you guys want to pick these up. So now that I got the caliper off, or unbolted, I'm going to just take it off like so. And I'm going to set it over here on top of the suspension and just rest it up here like this. And if yours won't stay up there, you can use like a bungee cord or something and hold it up there. You don't want it hanging by the hose, it can damage the hose. The next step is to get this caliper bracket off. And you're going to need a 21mm socket. So you're going to take out the bolt here and here and remove the bracket. And I'm just going to use my impact gun setup since there's plenty of room to work in here. If you don't have this, just use a regular ratchet. So once you get the bracket off, just set it aside for now, and in a little bit we'll do a little prep work on these. Since we're just going to replace these rotors, I'm just going to use a hammer. They're going to be kind of in here to the hub here a little bit here. They're not just going to come off. So I'm just going to use a hammer and just give it a tap from the back side and remove the rotor. Now that the rotor's off, I got my caliper back up here, and I just kind of took it and set it up on top of the backing plate here. And you want to inspect the boots and stuff, make sure they're not torn or leaking or anything like that on the pistons. And once those are okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to push these pistons back into the bore of the caliper. One of the things I'm not going to do is open the bleeder screw. I'm going to leave the bleeder screw closed, so we need to remove a couple ounces of brake fluid from the master cylinder. And the reason why is we're going to push these pistons back in, and what it's going to do is push the fluid that's in the calipers back up the line and into the master cylinder. And if it's over full or ever been topped off in time, it'll overspill into the engine bay. So we need to remove a couple ounces. So I'm going to remove a couple ounces of brake fluid with a little turkey baster and just suck a couple ounces out. Then we'll push these pistons back in. And then when we're done, what we're going to do is we're going to pump this brake pedal 6 or 7 times, and then what that's going to do is push the fluid back from the master cylinder back into the caliper, and there won't be any air in the system at all. You won't have to bleed the brakes after you're done. But as a disclaimer, I always say if your pedal feels a little funny to you, I would recommend you bleed it. But you do it this way, you should not have to bleed the brakes. Okay, to push the pistons back in, what I'm going to do is take one of the old brake pads and set it in the caliper like this, and I'm going to use my dual piston caliper tool, and it looks like this. It's kind of like a little cocking gun. So at the end right here, I got a little trigger, and I'm going to reset it. So I'll just push the trigger here at the end and push it in. So now we're going to set it in the caliper like this, and you just squeeze the trigger like this, and every time you squeeze it, it pushes the pistons in a 1/4 inch or so. And so it takes about 10 or 15 little squeezes of this, and it'll push the pistons all the way back into the bore. Just when you do this, you want to make sure that the brake hose is not kinked. If the hose is kinked, it won't allow the fluid to go back in the master cylinder at all. It won't push in. So just make sure the line is straight as you can get it, and then cock it in. After you're done, the pistons will be pushed back in the bores, and they'll look like this. Okay, now that the caliper's prepped, we're going to prep the hub here. So if you're in an area where you get a lot of rust and stuff on these, you want to use a wire brush or sandpaper or something like that, and scrub off everything here. And scrub as much of the rust surface off as you can. So now we're going to prep our new rotors. A lot of times when you get new rotors, they come with oil on the surface. That way they don't rust while they're sitting on the shelves at the stores. So if they have that on there, I recommend you use something like brake clean or warm soapy water and wash the oil residue off the rotors. Okay, so I just slipped the rotor back on over the hub and used the lug nut to hold it in place. Okay, now that the rotor is back on, we need to prep our bracket here. And what we're going to do is, our brake pads came with new hardware, so we're going to transfer them over. So I'm going to do one at a time. So I'll take it off, I'll pop it off of a flat blade screwdriver, and then I'll find one that matches, and then I'll install it. So you're going to do that for all 4 corners of the bracket. So after changing out your hardware, we need to prep the slide pins here. So a lot of times these will stick, so you need to check and see if yours are stuck or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my fingers like this and pull the boot back off like that, and then you can slide the pin out. And then I'm going to wipe this down and I put a fresh layer of grease on it, but I'm not going to use any type of grease. I'm going to use a special grease. So this grease is called Seal Glide. It's a specially designed grease to work with brake parts. It doesn't break down with heat, and so I recommend you use it. I'll put a link for this in the description of the video also. So after wiping it down and putting a fresh layer of grease on it, I'm going to put it back into the boots, and I'm going to work it back and forth and make sure that grease gets in there, and work it back and forth and make sure everything is sliding the way it's supposed to slide. And then I'll put the booter back around the lip on the and I'll do that for top and bottom. Now that our caliper bracket's all prepped and ready to go back on, I'm going to prep the bolts. To do that, I'm going to put a little bit of a blue thread locker on the threads, and this is like a little glue that helps prevent the bolts from vibrating loose and backing back out. So I'm going to put a little of that on there. And the brand we use here at How To Automotive is a brand called Permatex. I will leave a link for this in the description of the video also. That way if you need to pick some up, you can use it. I highly recommend you put that on there for just a little extra security. We will also take a little bit of the grease and put a thin layer on the slide pin, on the hardware here. So put a thin layer on there. Okay, after running the bolts back in on the caliper bracket until they're snug, I used my torque wrench here, my 1/2-inch drive torque wrench, and I torqued the bolts down to 184 foot-pounds. I will leave a link in the description also for the ratchet if you need to pick that up. Now that our caliper brackets are torqued down, we need to install our brake pads. And on my particular brand that I'm using, they are marked inner and outer. So this one's the left-hand inner, so I'm working on the driver's side of this, so this is the left-hand side. So you're just gonna line the bottom tab in like this, and then rotate the top in and push it into a flush like that, and you'll do the same thing for the outer pad. So if your brand of parts that you use don't have these markings, just match them up with the old parts. Okay, now that the brake pads are installed, what I'm going to do next is put a thin layer of this Seal Glide brake grease on the backing shims on front and back, and what that does is help reduce vibrations and squeaks. Next, we're going to take the caliper here and put it back on. And when you put the brake caliper back on, you want to make sure that the brake hose itself is not twisted in any way. So now you can go ahead and install it, and what you're going to have to do is push the pins in like this as you put the caliper on. Now that the caliper is back on, I'm going to put a few dabs of this blue thread locker on the threads of the caliper bolts, and start these bolts and torque them down to 27 foot-pounds. Okay, after you get the bolts torqued down to 27 foot-pounds, you can go ahead and reinstall the wheel on this side and torque it down to 150 foot-pounds. And you're going to duplicate the exact same process for the opposite side. After that, you're going to lower the vehicle down and pump the brake pedal 6 or 7 times. What that's going to do is pump that brake fluid back into that caliper. And we're not going to bleed the brakes. You should have a nice firm brake pedal. But as a disclaimer, like I said earlier, if you feel like it's spongy or feels weird to you, I recommend you bleed the air out of them, and you would bleed the right front first and then the left front. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos. Encourage you to subscribe. Invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. And also remember that I'm going to put links for all the parts and tools that I use in this video in the description of it. Thank you again for watching.